Hello. Welcome, everyone. Thank you. I see a bunch of people signing on for our webinar today. This has actually been one of our more popular webinars, so it's going to be a full room. So I'm going to give it a little time before we get started for everyone to get in here, get settled. Hopefully all have your glass of water and ready to hear from Quincy Jordan, who's presenting today. But while we're waiting for everybody to get settled in, I just thought I'd do a couple of housekeeping items first. One thing to know is, of course, we are recording the webinar today. So those of you who want to share this with others who maybe weren't able to attend, will be able to do so. We'll be emailing that out to everyone later this week or maybe next week. And we do have a Q&A portion of this event set aside at the end. So you guys can use the Q&A module there that's at the bottom of your Zoom screen, or we'll be monitoring chat and we'll be able to get those questions answered for you. But, to get started, I am really excited to hand things over to Quincy Jordan, who is at Agile Thought, which is a company that partners with IdeaScale. Quincy speaks all the time. He's got a lot of great information, both about transformation as well as how agility fits into that. So thank you so much, Quincy, for agreeing to present to us today.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jessica, for having me. I'm pretty excited about today and excited to deliver this talk.
Excited to have you.
All right, so here we go. So I just want to give a little bit of background first of Agile Thought. So Agile Thought is a company that I work for. We are a full service custom software development company with a host of other things. We're a consulting company. But so today I'm going to talk about the journey of Agile Transformation. And really excited about this talk. Again, just a little bit more information on Agile Thought. We are in North and South America, Central America, founded in 2000, roughly 3,000 or so consultants, and consulting company. We're broken up into 3 different areas. Those areas being Innovate, where we do strategic consulting; Build, where we have digital delivery; and our Run line of service, which is digital operations. All right, so there is a show called The Good Place. And on this show, they talk about the timeline of life. And one of the things, it's a really funny show, and I really like the show. It's called The Good Place. It's all about what happens throughout life. And so this question comes up when people reach a certain point. And that question is, well, what is the timeline? Like, what is the timeline of existence? What's the timeline for people and so forth? And so they draw out the timeline, and it turns out that the timeline that they draw out looks like the name Jeremy Bearimy. And then, of course, like the little dot, as you can see over the I, represents Tuesdays and sometimes never. All right. So I point this out to say that on the journey of an agile transformation, it's not linear. There are loops, there are repetitive areas, there are things that you come back to that you thought that you would never have to come back to. There are new things that you learn, things that you repeat, but you repeat with more experience and knowledge than you had before. And all of that eventually helps you to get to the good place when it comes to an agile transformation. And so I thought I would lead with that because, one, I like the show, I like the series. And 2, every time I see that Jeremy Bearimy timeline, it just reminds me of many organizations' experience when it comes to agile transformation. So I am Quincy Jordan. As Jessica mentioned, I am the director and executive advisor for what we call an Innovate practice, part of what we just Innovate line of service, part of what we just talked about. So by degree, I am an electrical engineer, also have degrees in physics and math. I'm an inquisitive problem solver, host of certifications. And the reason I share all that is just to say, I like having lots of ways to get stuff done. Like that's the whole thing. I like being really equipped. So other things that I'm interested in, I'm big on family, traveling, fishing, and nearly anything that involves water sports. So it's a little bit about who I am and the things that I do. So I want to start here and think about what Agile is. So you'll hear people say things like, oh, the Agile methodology or the Agile project management. And Agile is a mindset. That mindset is governed by what's known as the Agile Manifesto. That Agile Manifesto is, as you see here, individuals and interactions over processes and tools, working software over comprehensive documentation. And I also like to look at that as a working product because Agile has proven to be very successful well beyond the IT space. But working software over comprehensive documentation, customer collaboration over contract negotiation, and responding to change over following a plan. So Agile is the mindset. That mindset is expressed through various approaches of frameworks, methodologies, processes. So you have Kanban, or some people say Kanban. You have DSDM. You have dynamic systems management method, I believe. You have Crystal. You have Scrum, which is the most popular of all of the Agile approaches. You have XP, or extreme programming. So there are a host of different ways to exercise this mindset. So when you're looking at an Agile transformation, as I mentioned with the Jeremy Bearimy concept from The Good Place, the transformation is not linear by any stretch. And so that journey, what that journey really looks like, that journey is a strategic combination of excursions. So if you think about like shows like, what's that show called? The Amazing Race, where, they're going all over the world and they're looking, it's like this massive kind of scavenger hunt, so to speak. And so there are numerous excursions on this journey of Agile transformation. So it's not that linear path. People want the linear path, but the journey is just not that. And if you think about how life works, how your career works, the journeys typically are not linear. Most journeys aren't. And those that are linear tend to be very short-lived. And part of the reason for that is because things change. Things change over time. They change because people change, because we're humans. And so the journey is not a straight path. And it is combined of several different types of excursions. So I'm not going to go into all the types of excursions, but I do want to mention a few and just kind of talk about a few of those excursions. So one of those excursions along the journey is clarity of the desired business outcomes. All right, so that may sound a little easier than it is to come about, but you may be amazed at how much effort leadership, senior leaders have to put into, okay, what are the desired business outcomes that we want for the organization? What is it that we're really trying to do? Because we have a lot of organizations where people are very, very busy doing a lot of stuff that goes nowhere. They're doing a lot of things. They're very busy, but they're not producing value. Part of the reason for that is because the business outcomes that are desired aren't clear. And in some cases, they may be clear, but guess what? They're only clear to leadership. So that has to translate all the way down. There are many ways to do that. There are different techniques, OKRs, objectives and key results. That's one of the ways that I am very much in favor of, that helps with that. But that's one of those excursions along the journey. Again, remember, it's not a straight path. So clarity of desired business outcomes. Then you need to choose an agile approach. So initially, right off the bat, many people will say, and they'll just think, well, Scrum. Scrum is agile. Agile is Scrum. That's what I've heard. That's what we want to do. We heard that it's cheaper and faster, and that's the thing. And when you take a framework or you take any approach and you force fit it into a situation without really considering, is this the best approach to solve our problems and reach our desired business outcomes? When you don't do that, then you may choose a really good approach and put it into the wrong application. So on that excursion, you want to make sure that you're choosing the right agile approach if you're on that agile journey. And even before that, you need to ask yourself the question, before we embark on this journey of agile, why are we doing this? Why should we even go on this agile journey? How does this actually even help us? What will this do to our organization? Will it help us? Is there value? Are there pitfalls? Are there things that we need to consider? All of that should be a consideration. Because guess what? It is possible that agile may not be the best approach for your organization. Sorry, I kind of had to duck because I thought people were going to start throwing rocks at me. But it's true. It may not be the best for your organization. Now, it is also true that many companies have achieved great success taking agile approaches. And that is factual, statistically, and otherwise. So while it may not be the best for all, it has shown to be very valuable for many. So you also want to create sustainability and consistency as part of this excursion, or one of those excursions is creating that sustainability, creating that consistency. We'll talk more about that really right towards the end around the sustainability and so forth. But again, different paths, different ways to go. And so you want to consider those things. Another excursion is cadence and active leadership support. Cadence, because we want a level of consistency that leadership is involved with the transformation, because if you do not have support from leadership, your transformation will likely not succeed. Hands down. Now, what does that support look like? What should it look like? Well, number one, it should be active, not passive. So this is an area where when you're on the journey and you're going down this path of this excursion, this is one of the earlier areas that becomes sometimes a stumbling block. And the reason that it sometimes becomes a stumbling block is because senior leaders hear things about agile approaches and they hear that it's cheaper and it's faster. That happens to be mentioned along with a whole bunch of other stuff. And that's the part that they latch on to, is the cheaper and faster part. And sometimes they don't latch on to the part that says, as senior leaders, you will have to be active in this transformation. There will be changes that will challenge you. And those challenges and those changes, they're good, but you need to know they're coming. And you need to embrace them. And we'll talk more about those challenges as well. But one of those excursions is cadence and active leadership support. Leaders have to be active. There are many transformations that try to start from the bottom up. and they reach a point of where they plateau, where they cannot exceed anymore because they don't have leadership support. So that is critical. In the last excursion that I'll mention here, again, these are not all the excursions. And part of the reason these are not all the excursions is because there are no two transformations that are just alike. Doesn't matter what approach you take. I don't care if you use SAFe or Nexus or LESS, or it doesn't matter. There are no two transformations alike because there are no two organizations that are identical. Therefore, you have to figure out what works for that organization and use whatever agile approach within the confines of that organization. So the last excursion here that I want to mention is constant communication. And I maybe should even say constant and consistent communication, but more so constant communication. People need to know how things are going. You need communication between stakeholders and teams so that they can get good feedback. You need good communication within the teams. You need good communication at the program level. You need good communication between your C-suite and why this agile transformation is important to the overall organization. And let's say it's not at an enterprise level, but it is only within IT, then you need your CIO to step in and give good, strong indicators of why this is important, how this helps the business outcomes for the organization. All of those things are very important and critical. So that's the aspect of the excursions that we find along the journey. But who are you taking the journey with? So you need to identify the right people at the beginning. Does that mean that you cannot identify people later on as you go? No, it doesn't mean that. But you do need a rock solid team towards the beginning. So those folks tend to be people who are early adopters. Like these are the kind of characteristics that you're looking for. Early adopters, people who are strong advocates for change, learning leaders. So not just leaders who will essentially dictate everything and even if they're given the vision, I mean, that's great and they should do that. But you also want folks who you can identify as they're always trying to learn how to do things better themselves. Like those are the characteristics that you want to look for. And so on this transformation journey, this agile journey, there are two primary groups, regardless of the transformation, that typically, in my experience, that you want to have. So you've kind of been getting an eye for different people who may be early adopters, those change advocates, and so forth. And so then you want to think about like a transformation team and Agile Champions. And there's an old African proverb that says, if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. It takes a transformation team, not a single sponsor. And I say a team. And it takes a team of Agile champions, not a single champion. And we'll dig into that as we go. So when we're looking at a transformation team, so a transformation team, they act as a single unit. If you think about the role, if you're familiar with the role of a Scrum Master. So the role of a Scrum Master is they are to protect the team. They are to remove impediments. They're essentially there as a servant leader for a Scrum team or a product team to essentially help them do what they do best and create a great product and create value. The transformation team for an agile transformation works in a very similar way. While the team is made up of different individuals, and the team is pretty small, they act as a single unit to protect the transformation itself and to help the transformation itself to be successful and bring about value and so forth. So they're like the Navy SEALs of change. So who should they be? Do they need to be John, the SVP of IT, and should they be the CIO, and should they be the VP of some other part of the organization? Not necessarily. The folks that they really should be are those who really understand how to navigate your organization, how to influence leaders, and who really just have a strong passion for seeing things change. And sometimes the folks that make up that transformation team may not always be the people that you think that they should be. So I'm thinking about, so there was a client that I had before, still do actually, and on their transformation team, there was an individual that on day one, she was questioning everything. And she flat out came out and said, I am the negative Nelly. Like that was the term that she used. She said, I am going to be the negative Nelly here. And initially, even with all my experience, I was a little on the fence. But you know what? She turned out to be almost like the biggest advocate for the transformation in that organization. And she was a really deep influencer in that organization. She was well connected within the organization. So it was easy for her to reach out to people she knew, to pull them in, to get their support, to have them to be guest speakers for things like community of practices, other sessions that we may have had. So it's not always the most senior person, and she wasn't very senior. I mean, she was somewhat senior, but she wasn't like the SVP, or something like that. Most definitely wasn't in the C-suite, but she was very influential and she was very reliable, and she was didn't mind challenging things where she felt they needed to be challenged. So that transformation team is very critical to the success of an agile transformation, and you have to have them on your journey. If you don't have them on their journey, I can almost guarantee you're probably just taking a long walk by yourself. And that transformation will be very short-lived if it even gets off the ground. And part of the reason for that is things happen. This is not what a transformation team, this is not their, as some people say, their day job. This is part of what they do. So you need a combination of folks who, if someone gets an opportunity and they now need to move to a different part of the organization, or for some reason they leave the company, whatever the case, you need a decent enough number, which is usually somewhere around 3 to 5 or so. 5 is probably ideal, but you need enough so that the transformation itself would not become disrupted as life continues to happen, because some things are going to happen. So in addition to the transformation team along this journey, you need what I call Agile Champions. These Agile Champions, they're not protecting the transformation. They are strongly advocating for an agile mindset, an agile approach, whatever framework or frameworks or processes or methodologies that are chosen, they're strong advocates for that. They're fighters. They're people with grit. And just like the transformation team, they're not always who you would think of as a champion, because these folks oftentimes are not, they're definitely not very senior. They're usually maybe a step below, let's say, middle management, but they're like down for the cause, essentially. They really understand Agile pretty well. And where they don't understand it really well, they're willing on their own to go off and learn. They tend to take a lot of initiative. They tend to be people who might be involved in local meetups and those kinds of things. So those are folks that you really want to look for as Agile champions. All right, so along this journey that we're talking about, we know the kind of folks that we're looking for up front. We know that we need to identify an agile approach. We know that we need to have made our business outcomes that we're looking for really clear. Then, what about culture? So what about culture on this journey? This is an area that I strongly advocate for, I strongly push for, because company culture really drives many of the outcomes from a company. I don't care how good your product is. If your culture is horrible, your product may never even make it to the market, or you're going to have high turnover, you're going to have really bad retention, and you're going to lose really good people on a regular basis. Now, in an agile transformation, sometimes people feel as though culture, that's the last thing that you deal with, right? I am not an advocate of that. Culture must come first, along the way, at the end, and once it's over. Culture runs throughout. It is not something that you can wait until the end, because it's going to happen whether you wait or not. So putting culture last in an agile transformation is like waiting until you complete building a house to deal with a tree that was already growing there. You can wait, absolutely. Now you're going to have to figure out, how do you deal with this massive tree that has grown up inside of the house? So you really want to address culture from the beginning, because what you cultivate from the beginning is what you will have grown in the end. So you need to address culture up front. Now, does that mean you have the culture fixed up front? No. But it does mean that you're considering the culture up front. You've established the values that you want the culture to be supported by, and you know the behaviors up front that you want to develop. Now, will that happen immediately? No, it won't happen immediately. But you know ahead of time the behaviors that you're trying to create within your organization as you're on this agile transformation journey. Because along that journey, you're going to run into many things that you just don't know what they are, and you don't know that they're going to happen. You don't see them coming in all instances, but you have to be able to move forward in spite of that. In spite of the uncertainty, you have to be able to move forward. So you want to develop the behaviors that will have people moving through the discomfort, because that discomfort will become an enemy to your transformation if you don't establish that is part of our culture. That's where we're going. We're going to where we embrace those things that may make us uncomfortable. Because on the other side of that discomfort is going to be a great reward. There's going to be significant value. There's going to be a healthy, transparent organization. There's going to be good communication. So you have to move through that discomfort. Then you want to become resilient to change. Resiliency to change in a transformation is critical because as we talked about earlier with the Jeremy Bearimy type timeline, which again is not a real thing, but there are going to be many opportunities for change. And so when they occur, you need to be resilient enough to take the feedback, learn from the feedback, and improve. So in that process, and along this journey, once you are now pretty much set, uncertainty is going to happen. There's some things that we will know for sure, but there's some things that we're not going to know, which is part of the reason why many organizations have embarked on an agile journey, because it's so adaptable in terms of how you think, and then all of the frameworks and methodologies and processes and so forth to express that, that you can adapt a lot better and move with those uncertain things that come along. So that also means that we have to reevaluate how we see success and how we measure success. So the questions that you want to ask: how are individuals being incentivized? So when you're thinking across the business, how is business success going to be measured? And how are people being incentivized to help reach that business success? How are we going to measure teams? So in many agile approaches, it is that, well, you succeed as a team or you fail as a team. And if that is the case, then as an individual of this team, why am I getting measured differently than my colleague who is also part of the same team? So you want to incentivize people towards team success over individual success. And if you don't, then you're going to start rewarding heroes versus creating high-performing teams. And we've all seen the heroes out there, and they'll come through at the end. But they're just one individual, and they're not strong enough to carry an entire team. They're strong enough to stand out for themselves. But you want high-performing teams. So how are you going to measure the success of the team? So these are things that you have to start adjusting along the journey. And you have to think about this on the front end of the journey. And if you don't, you have to keep in mind that you're going to likely run into a problem later because it was not thought about towards the beginning. So that's reminding me of a client from before where we were doing a transformation. Transformation started somewhere around, we did what we call an Agile Ignite, where we go in, we do some assessments, some training, some stuff like that, to see what everything is and come out with a nice roadmap to say, this is where we think this transformation will go, and this is how we think we will get there. And so this was somewhere around December when we did that, November, December. We were supposed to start in January, but it got pushed to March. And it got pushed because they really liked the output from that assessment. So they wanted other people to hear it. All right, so what's happening at this time is the start of the transformation has just gotten pushed from January to February, and then we actually really started in March. So everything was going great from March all the way up to around November. Then we hit November, and there was something different in the air. Literally, the vibe in that building was different. And it took me about a day or so before I could figure out what was happening. And this is what exactly took place. Performance reviews were about to come out or about to be done. Because the transformation was pushed into March versus starting in January, the personal objectives that everyone was going to be measured by, and to some degree, even some of the business objectives within specific units, was done before the transformation started. So when we got through into that next year, when we hit that season again, everyone was scrambling to check the boxes because their bonuses were on the line. Now, this had nothing to do with all the progress that we had made with the transformation. But because that was not factored earlier on, that's what we had to deal with later on in the transformation. Fortunately, later on in the next cycle, that was learned from, and so the performance was factored in based off of the transformation, based off of the new way of working, based off of how teams were now going to work, based off how new metrics were going to be done, agile metrics. So it made things a lot better for the organization in the next cycle. But in that first cycle, that was part of what took place. Now, even though the team succeeds together or fails together, the team is still made up of individuals. So it's important for all of us to feel some level of reward in what we do. And so one of the ways along this journey that you can do that is to ensure that the individual team contributor can directly see how the work they do on a daily basis contributes to a very specific business outcome that the business is looking for. Because then they know why they're doing what they're doing. They're not just hands on keyboards, just doing stuff. And then lastly, the organization, you have to consider, how are we going to measure organizational success? Is retention an issue? Do we have strong advocates within the organization or different parts of the organization that are constantly trying to bring in other good and talented and gifted folks, as well? Or are people warning all of their friends, don't come work here? So which is it? And you need to make sure that you have good metrics for what success looks like for that. So along this journey, you want to make sure that you're expecting waves of challenges and expect to evolve. So those challenges are going to come. They're going to come to the leaders. They're going to come to the teams, and they're going to come to the individual contributors. There is no way around it. Those challenges are going to come. They're not going to hit all at one time. They're going to be repetitive, and you're going to persevere through those things. The important part is to know that they're coming. It's very easy to get sidetracked, knocked off when you don't know something's coming, but when you know that something is, it's a lot easier to deal with that. So systems thinking, I kind of consider to be like the power of an agile transformation, because you're not looking at just one thing. So on this journey, you're looking at all these different parts, all these different excursions that I kind of talked about, all these different things. And you want to consider along those things really three fundamental things: sustainability, reliability, and maintenance. How sustainable is this system of systems that we're creating on this journey? How sustainable are our communications? How sustainable are our programs? How sustainable is our portfolio management along our Agile journey? How sustainable is our technology? How reliable are those things? So not just, can it keep going, but can we rely on them? Do they have a good track record for us? Or are we creating a new track record, which is okay if that's the case. Then the last thing with an Agile transformation journey is maintenance. This part oftentimes is forgotten because an organization will transform, which is not a short period of time. That may take anywhere from as short as maybe 8 months to as long as a few years, literally, depending on the size of the organization. But do you have maintenance in place? Are you doing things to maintain the transformation that the organization has gone through, that you have achieved? Because you're going to have people to leave, you're going to have new people to come, and you need things in place, tools in place to maintain the transformation once transformation has taken place. Then we want to minimize the cultural debt that occurs as well. So we talked earlier about the culture has to be at the beginning, all along, throughout, and so forth, and even once it's over. But if you don't watch it, and if you don't consider culture up front, then you may end up in cultural debt. And that is simply carrying old behaviors into new cultures. So you want to look out for that. That is one of the things that will come to bite you if you do not watch out for that. There are a lot of folks that talk about technical debt, which is extremely important to minimize and deal with. But you cannot forget about cultural debt, in particular, if you do not address culture up front and all the way throughout. But even when you do, you're likely still going to have some cultural debt because we're human and things are we're not robots. So there's always going to be some adjustment when change is there, because as humans in general, oftentimes we don't like experiencing change ourselves. We like seeing it, but we don't always like to experience it. And so you want to create a learning culture, and that learning culture needs to support continuous learning. It needs to support running experiments. So there needs to be, people need to know they can try things and that it's okay for them to fail, as long as when they're failing fast, that they're learning faster. Those things are helpful and those things need to be known. And so on this journey, again, there are many excursions combined together to create this Agile journey. It's not linear. You have to include culture. You have to include leadership. You have to address and support the individual contributors, team members. All of that has to be factored. And so I know we're close on the time. I do want to make sure I leave some time for questions. So Jessica, do we have any questions?
We do. We've got some questions coming in. But first of all, let me just say, love the cultural references. I love The Good Place. So fun to see the Jeremy Bearimy included in there. And the points that you make are really great. Like, culture isn't a trophy that you get and you put on the mantle, and then you can just tell everyone that your culture is great. And I think that you have a lot of good ideas too about like thinking of the plan as excursions rather than a linear process. But one of the first questions that came in that I think was interesting was, what's the best way to find or identify those early adopters and change advocates and learning leaders that you want on your team? Like that woman that you were saying, who was the negative Nelly, who ended up being really great. How did you find her? Were you having meetings, or what are some techniques?
So oftentimes we'll do, like I said before, what we call an Agile Ignite. Some companies refer to it as discovery, although it's in Agile Ignite is much more than just discovery. But during that time, we're interviewing people at the company, we're observing people within the organization, and that's where we're picking up on those things. And it's more human skill than hard skill, I would say. But there are certain things that you would look for, the willingness to engage, how people ask certain questions. If you introduce a new concept in the conversation, and as soon as you introduce that concept, you immediately see that person pick up their phone and start doing something else, they're probably not going to be one of your early adopters, because for whatever reason, they're interested in something else. But those that you see that engage you visually, like they're really paying attention to what you're saying, and they ask really good questions about what you're describing. Like those are the types of things that you want to look for.
I was also wondering along those lines, you were talking about some of the qualities you want people to have, like the comfort with discomfort or resiliency. Are there ways that you can train people to be comfortable with those things or teach that? Are there any activities to get people comfortable with that stuff?
So there are different things that you can do. Number one, you can take it upon yourself and say, okay, let me list out the things that I know I'm not comfortable with. Like not big things, just small things. Okay, I'm not comfortable with eye contact, or I'm not comfortable standing in front of people and talking. I'm not comfortable with making suggestions in meetings. I'm not comfortable with those things. Pick those things out. No one has to know that you're not comfortable with those things. Pick them out and just take one thing at a time and say, and set a goal for yourself. Okay, for the next week, I'm going to find 5 different opportunities to do this thing that I know I'm not comfortable with. I'm going to move myself past that discomfort. And I'm not saying that from theory. I'm saying that from personal experience as well. So, there are many things that I've done throughout my career, just, in life in general, where sometimes people will feel like I'm taking unnecessary risk. But for myself, I am pushing myself past a discomfort point. And that's also part of it, is that you have to know it, and you have to be whole enough within yourself to not be concerned with if other people get it or not. Because they will, but they won't get it until later. But you'll never get to that point if you let what you think about that stop you. So there are many other things that I could ask, but I know we're close on the time, so I want to make sure that we get to whatever questions we have.
Well, it makes a lot of sense to me. I think they've had dating workshops and stuff. They'll say people aren't comfortable talking to strangers, so they'll just be like, well, just talk to one person, at your office you normally talk to, and work up to that. You're not asking somebody out for a date right away. You're just pushing past your initial discomfort to increase its range.
Exactly.
You talked about the importance of great metrics that align to that, the transformational success journey. Do you have an example of that? Somebody was asking if you had an example of somebody who'd set up really great metrics for success.
So I think OKRs are really good, objectives and key results. I know it's kind of turned into a little bit of a buzz phrase, I guess, lately. But they are, they're really effective. They're simple, similar to what people call user stories. Sometimes they're a little bit harder to write than it is to think of or, to conceptualize. But you just have your objective, which is generally going to be something that's aspirational. It's not something that is easily quantified in terms of that objective itself. But then you have the key results, which is how you're going to quantify reaching that objective. So, whatever that objective may be, it could be, hey, our team is going to be the most successful team at Idea Scale. All right. Great objective. Now, how are we going to know when we reach it? So these are the key results that we're going to put in place that we can quantify reaching that. So those OKRs, I mean, that's a really good metric, especially at a higher transformation level. Like those are really good metrics to use. There are plenty of other metrics that you can use as well. But I find that OKRs are really good for that. And you can tie them into your product backlogs within your Agile framework of choice. But you can tie them into your backlogs all the way down to your particular PBIs.
Well, I think this is sort of a related scenario question. This person is trying to get you to take this example and see what you make of it. So say they create a 100-person Agile central team in maybe finance. And 7 months down the track, the management and HR are worried. What are the people actually doing? How much is getting done? Is there a way that they can reassure those other functions that the Agile teams are really hitting it out of the park and track some of those milestones along the way?
Yes. So depending on the Agile approach they're taking, but let's say if you're taking Scrum. So in Scrum, you have your events, you have your sprint review, invite them into the sprint reviews. Now, what if you say, well, okay, but this is like a C-level person. They're not going to show up every couple of weeks to a sprint review. Okay, that's fine. So then you can do things. So I have a client where we do what we call a showcase. So the showcase, which is not a PI review, it's a showcase. So I want to make sure people aren't confusing that with SAFe. So this showcase that we do, we invite in essentially the who's who of the company. That's who's basically invited. The who's who, not anyone can show up, but any of the senior leaders, they're all invited. And we literally showcase what has been done over, let's say, maybe the past 10 or 12 sprints in some, not 10 or 12 weeks. In some cases, it could go slightly longer, or it could be a little bit less. But there isn't a strict time on it. So you can do something like that if you can't get them to come to the sprint reviews. And if you're not using something like SAFe, then you can create something like that showcase where every 6 weeks or every 8 weeks or something along those lines, you invite them in, those same people that are asking, how do I know they're producing anything? Then they come in and they can see it. They can see what they've done. They can ask questions about it. They can engage with them. They can collaborate. They can say, oh, that is awesome. I think that's really good. Can you also do this? Can we also get that? And then you can respond and you can say, hey, that's great. But that's not on our horizon right now, but it's something that we can add, down the road. So hopefully that helps with that question.
We had a question here about culture, and that's, how do you address culture, especially cultural debt, at the end of the process? Is it new training? Is it change management? How do you address that problem?
So you address cultural debt the same way you do financial debt. If you let it back up long enough, it's probably going to take you a little while to pay it off. And so you can pay it down by creating mechanisms for people in the organization to offer feedback, to not only offer feedback, but to see how the feedback is being used. You can create more transparency within the organization. You can create opportunities as well. But the main thing is you need to know what you want the culture to be in order to do that. Otherwise, what are you trying to change it to in the end if you don't really know what you want it to be? So you need to make sure that you know what that is so that you have that target to go towards. But yeah, I mean, essentially, you want to increase the transparency and involve. And this is one other thing that I didn't mention earlier. Involve the decision making at the lowest level possible. So that way, you don't have people at a higher level making decisions and people at a lower level never being part of that decision making at all. We're knowledge workers, most of us these days. And that means we like using the knowledge that we have, which means we like being part of making decisions. And so it's important to have good mechanisms in place so that people can contribute to that decision making. When people don't have that opportunity, it begins to erode the trust. And so you want the trust to get stronger. And those are the types of things that help to build a very good and strong company culture.
Right. I think definitely it's like all of those buzzwords that you hear, like employee engagement, workplace purpose, like that level of inclusion particularly, at the entry level or at the bottom levels of a company makes a huge difference in influencing culture, especially when you listen actually to them and deliver on that.
Yeah.
So I like the part where you dodged the tomatoes when you suggested, sometimes Scrum isn't for everyone. So somebody asked, how do you know which approach is right for your business? How do you matchmake yourself with a methodology that works for you?
So first, I would say you need to make sure that you're understanding the approach and the intent of the approach. If you do not know the intent of a thing, you are destined to abuse it. It's inevitable that you're going to misuse whatever that is because you don't really understand the original intent of it. So many of the Agile approaches, the intent is to deal with uncertainty. It's to deal with fast-moving markets, getting things to the market quick, those types of things. That's part of it. And so those are some of the things that you want to make sure that you're able to address. And oftentimes, I would say when it comes to like support or operations, Kanban is usually really good. When it comes to product development in a company that is not on the cutting edge of technology, Scrum is really good. Scrum is also really good if they are on the cutting edge. But the reason I make that distinction is because if it's a company that is very, very fast paced, very cutting edge technology wise, XP is super great, especially if you wrap it inside a Scrum framework, then it's really good. But I would always say start by understanding the different approaches that are out there and making sure you understand the business problems that you're trying to solve. Those are the two things you want to figure out first to let you know what direction to go in.
I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think that's a great place to leave us here at the top of the hour. So thank you so much, Quincy, for taking us through your thinking and for presenting the Jeremy Bearimy journey of innovation transformation. Have a good day, everyone.
It was my pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.